Hello everyone, and welcome to the channel. This is the first type of video I'm making like this. Most of my other videos are just 5v1 submissions, if you even know what that is. I'm not quite sure how well a video like this will really do, considering I'm not really sure. There's a lot of overlap between Infinity Blade and Deltarune, but I'm aware there's at least a little bit of correlation between the two. Alright, you guys all saw the title, you know what this is about. This is one of those classic death battle videos, but with lower quality and featuring our two favorite blade-wielding antagonists, Ryth, Deathless Blade Master from Infinity Blade 2, and the Roaring Knight from Deltarune. Alright, I don't have the most amount of time, and I'm sure you're busy too, so let's just get straight into what this is going to be. We're going to take the Roaring Knight and then Ryth separately, analyze their strengths and weaknesses, and at the end, put them up against one another in a hypothetical battle. This is a death battle. I don't have a huge animation prepared with tons of high quality effects and voice actors, so excuse my, how do I put this? Charm. But what you get is what you get. Important disclaimer, I am not a power scaler. I'm aware there's an entire community of people that use a character's feats and durability to come up with an exact ranking for said character so that they can have the most accurate measurement possible of a character's power. I'm not going to do this for two main reasons. One, when using characters from multiple universes, I feel that just having a ranking system will always be flawed, no matter how much time you put into it, simply because just games' universes work differently from one another. And two, I find that these people often use data that wasn't really intended by the creators of this work, and it ends up being inaccurate in one way or another. So this is, at least in my opinion, a more fundamental death battle, if that makes any sense, where I'm going to try to take data that is very clearly meant to be intentional, and then use that to determine which one will kill each other. Alright, I think that's everything settled. With that out of the way, let's get into analyzing our first opponent, the challenger, the one, the only. The Roaring Knight is definitely an interesting opponent to put in this type of hypothetical battle for a number of reasons. One, we really don't know how strong they truly are. For those not completely in the loop about what Deltarune is, the Roaring Knight is the main antagonist of the game and makes their grand debut in Chapter 3, where they fight against our party. However, this isn't really the most cut and dry battle ever. One, you are really meant to lose the first time, which is kind of telling for how strong they are, but there's an alternate path where you can win. And I'm sure that everyone kind of knows this already, but this is just to reiterate for those in the back. Regardless, to get back on track, this fight is weird because Chris, our main character, is very heavily implied to be working with the knight. Chris holds their punches. Chris sends a signal to the knight if you manage to no-hit it. And probably the most telling thing, if you actually do manage to beat this secret path, Chris kneels before the knight. They're very clearly working together, and as such, I have a big feeling that the knight is holding back in one way or another, whether it be for Chris's or the party's sake. I think the two strongest pieces of evidence that the knight isn't giving it their all is, one, we don't actually deplete the knight to 0 HP, we're actually a fair ways off, and two, when Susie, the party attacker, is about to end the fight, the knight does 2 quick slashes in rapid succession, instantly downing both Susie and Ryth, the party healer. And then this is the scene where Chris kneels, as I mentioned earlier. But the fact the knight is able to do this is telling. Now, there is a popular theory that Chris was actually the one to down Susie and Ryth. However, I don't think this is true for 2 main reasons. One, I feel like Susie would realize where she's being attacked from. Like, maybe not in the moment, but surely afterwards she would have been like, oh, that's weird. I have like this weird knife wound in my back where Chris was standing. I'm sure that's not weird at all. But even in spite of that, Ryth literally saw the entire thing. And I know what he says is very odd bit of dialogue. I feel it's a very odd thing to say when like your arch enemy like kills you. But in the second scene, like immediately after, like literally like 10 seconds later, he doesn't seem very concerned with Chris. Like, I feel like if Chris actually downed Susie and then him, he wouldn't be like, oh, we were so close, Chris. You were so brave, Chris. Yeah, I don't really think this is supposed to be Chris that's doing it. I believe it is the knight. The second smaller reason is that the actual graphic for this slash is labeled like Roaring Knight / graphic or something along that line. So both those things put together, I do think that the Roaring Knight was the one to do this pretty impressive feat of just downing and pretty much insta-killing most of the party. So of course this does bring the obvious question. Why is the knight holding back, and how much are they holding back? As for why, really hard to say, and honestly beyond the scope of this video, you could make an entire video essay just discussing this topic. But for how much, this is a lot more relevant. The Fun Gang are like high schoolers, and if our friend the Roaring Knight can be beaten by a bunch of high schoolers, then that is not looking good for their battle with Ryth, who is centuries old. Thankfully, we have some evidence in the scene immediately afterwards that the knight can definitely tango with people far above their weight class. Mainly, Undyne. Undyne is the police chief for the town of the game, and she is very, very, very strong. Even in the light world. In the light world, she's able to bench press a car, and honestly, I feel people do embellish this a little bit. Like, personally, I think this is definitely played up more as a joke, but it's really the only thing we got. Undyne is very strong. That much is obvious. So, the fact that the knight can overpower her in the dark world, where Lightners become naturally stronger with basically little to no effort, is telling. Undyne, if we use her Undertale version, is the head of the Royal Guard in that game, and can lift boulders, and is proficient in spears, and is overall presented as one of the strongest characters. And the fact that the knight can beat them so easily should, at the very least, put them on somewhat of an even playing field. As for abilities of the knights, it's really hard to say, considering that Deltarune is an RPG, and these attacks don't really translate well into the real world, but we can make some educated guesses. For one, it's pretty clear that the knight has a bunch of ranged attacks, whether it be this like star barrage that they do at the first attack and a bunch of others after, where they send these stars out of their hands and then they explode, and they can send these daggers. At least I think that's what that's meant to be interpreted as. So they have a bunch of ranged attacks. Also, during the fight afterwards with Undyne, the knight morphs into this little, ball thing. I don't really know what that's about, but they can do this and they can move really quick and dodge and stuff, so they're at least pretty agile. And they can also turn into a bird. I don't know how useful that would be in a fight, but they seem to be able to move pretty fast when doing this. So we have a few things the knight can do. One, the knight is very quick. The knight has a bunch of range attacks. The knight can fly. The knight is pretty durable. The knight can pretty handedly take out trained warriors. And the knight is, overall, capable fighter with a host of supernatural abilities that can give them an edge, facing off against our relatively normal Ryth. Of course, no Infinity Blade related battle would be complete without mentioning the weapons that the knight is bringing to the table, that being their iconic black knife. It doesn't really seem like it does anything that crazy. It seems to be made of shadow crystals, at least assuming that's what the ending cutscene is implying. I don't know what that would actually do for a battle sense. I don't know. I don't think they're gonna just point the sword up to Ryth's stupid little helmet, and they're just gonna be like, "Holy shit, bro! Everything's a lie." So I don't think that much would work. But it does seem to be a fairly average sword with no unique abilities. Once again, I'd like to reiterate that unfortunately, we just don't know how strong the knight actually is, as our one true battle with them so far is definitely not an accurate representation of their strength. It's obvious that the knight is either holding back or we didn't get to see the full extent of their power. So, we just don't know as of Deltarune chapters 3 and 4, and I will leave off with these as our main talking points, so to speak. Now that we have discussed the knight, it's time to move on to who I believe most of my audience is going to be rooting for. The Deathless Blade Master, the Voyager, the one, the only.
And you've come to stop me.
I could not care less about the Pact or what you are doing here. I haven't faced a worthy opponent in centuries, and I yearn for the glory of a duel for the fates.
Ryth. For those joining from the Deltarune fandom and not at all related to the Infinity Blade fandom, you might be wondering who this guy actually is. Ryth is that one meme where there's two books stacked next to each other, and the big book says the amount of popularity a guy has versus the amount of stuff written on them. This guy has 9 lines and 3 appearances. One of them, he doesn't even talk. But let's get back to the point. Ryth first shows up in Infinity Blade 2, where he challenges the main character, Cyrus, to a duel. Cyrus assumes he's one of the guys that's meant to stop him on his quest, but Ryth reveals that he's actually the complete opposite. He doesn't give a fuck, and his only really satisfaction in life is to just find people to duel. And that's about it. Ryth is obscene for this series for a number of reasons. One, he uses lightsabers. They're called solar trans weapons, but it's just a lightsaber. It's just a copyright-free lightsaber. 2, he has a spaceship. This is a medieval fantasy game. Now, I'm very much simplifying for those not aware of Infinity Blade. I know full well that Infinity Blade is actually technically post-apocalyptic, and there is futuristic technology, and realistically what he's actually doing is perfectly fine within the role. But to the casual player, I really have to wonder what the reaction was to seeing this. And, well, you know what, I actually don't have to wonder too much, because I distinctly remember me running into this guy and being like, what the hell? Does he have a spaceship? But let's get back on track. So, Ryth. what do we know about him? Well, not too much, but we can make a few guesses. For one, his level is insanely high. Now, using levels as a means for power is a recipe for disaster, so we're not going to try to allocate resources into this. But we can make an educated guess that since his level and attack and defense is so high, that he himself is a very powerful opponent. Personally, I attribute this to his unique use of the aforementioned solar trans weapons. He is the only opponent in the series to use these weapons, and I have a feeling this is the lore reason for why he is so strong, as our characters are just not used to facing off against this unique type of weapon. But in terms of some established credibility, we know that he is at least a few centuries old. For those not entirely aware, he is a Deathless, who are the main antagonists of the series, and Deathless can live for basically ever. Now, there's different types of Deathless, and there's some Deathless that are older than others. Some are 10,000 years old, some are only a few thousand, some are billions of years old, them being Alsar and Galith, who are the main two. As for Ryth, we don't know when he came from, but we know that he is, as I said, at least a few centuries old. We can interpret the line he says where,
I could not care less about the pact or what you are doing here. I haven't faced a worthy opponent in centuries, and I yearn for the glory of a duel for the fates.
Interpret this one of two ways. We can interpret this A, he has been traveling in search of a warrior for centuries, or B, he has been fighting people for centuries in search of a worthy opponent. I'm personally leaning towards B, as I feel it's more accurate for the type of character that he is. The esoteric Deathless that only cares about fighting. It just feels more right for him. So this already puts Ryth at a huge experience lead than our friend the Knight. Having over centuries of fighting experience in a blade duel is certainly an advantage. But it doesn't stop there. Ryth is incredibly athletic. He has some of the most acrobatic feats in the series, being able to do backflips, spin kicks, cartwheels, and a bunch of other stuff. We're specifically using the Ryth from Infinity Blade 2, but the Infinity Blade 3 Ryth is even stronger, having spent years honing his skills. Like, we're going to use 2 though, because he looks cooler, and that's about it. And, as I mentioned earlier, Ryth's attack, HP, is off the charts compared to normal fighters. I did attribute this to the weapon, but it's safe to say that he is also very durable. It's not really like we can assign any kind of realistic, threshold for how tough he is. He doesn't really have any, I know I said I'm not a power scaler, but we don't really have a feat of him, surviving a bomb or something. Unless you count the gameplay, which I certainly won't, because then things would get real nutty really fast. But, to quickly reiterate, Ryth is centuries old at minimum, meaning that he has literally generations of combat experience built into his brain. Ryth wields a solar trans weapon, possibly the most powerful weapon in the Infinity Blade series, with the exception of the Infinity Blade itself, dealing outrageous amounts of damage. And he is also incredibly tough and incredibly acrobatic, being able to perform amazing feats of athleticism, and he is clearly a capable fighter in every sense of the word. It's worth noting that Ryth is proficient in the Aegis forms, which is the combat style of Infinity Blade. I think it's pretty safe to say that the Knight would not engage in the Aegis forms. I don't think they're gonna do the salute thing, and then they're gonna do their turns attacking each other. But I still think that this combat experience would transfer over into a more free-for-all fight. And it's not like people reusing the Aegis forms don't have experience dodging ranged attacks in Infinity Blade 2. Cyrus duels multiple opponents that have magical range attacks. Pretty much identical to the Knights, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. So, overall, I think that any argument that Ryth's skills don't transfer here because he's in a different combat style is kind of dumb. With all of Ryth's experience, it seems unlikely that his generations of skill wouldn't transfer over to this battle. Now, with all that said and done, I think that we have discussed our opponents with decent enough analysis, and we can move on into how a hypothetical fight between these two black-bladed warriors would actually turn out.
And you've come to stop me.
I could not care less about the pact or what you are doing here. I haven't faced a worthy opponent in centuries, and I yearn for the glory of a duel for the fates.
Now, for this hypothetical fight, we are going to have this set in the Dark World, so the Knight will be at full power, and we'll also say, for the sake of argument, that for whatever reason, Ryth is not affected by the Dark World's usual ability of amplifying Lightners, which I guess he would be. Basically, Reg Ryth versus Reg Knight. No special conditions, same battle map, same shit. So, what have we got for both sides? Well, for the Knights, they do have a pretty big advantage in the fact that they can at least float. They don't seem to be able to directly fly. We don't see them do that, but they can clearly move very, very quickly and do some pretty cool dash and dodge attacks and all that. I don't think Ryth is as fast as the Knight, and they should give a Knight the advantage in the dodging department, as they could, at least for a while, dodge out of the way of Ryth's attacks. But to swing things back over to Ryth, I think it's pretty safe to say that Ryth absolutely has the advantage in blade-on-blade combat. There is simply no way that with Ryth's experience as a Deathless and as a Blade Master of the Aegis forms, that he would not absolutely curb stomp the Knight in an actual traditional blade deal. Luckily for the Knight, they do not only have the blade to rely on, as the Knight does have multiple range attacks and the aforementioned ability to fly. I don't think they could do this forever, because clearly they'll get tired eventually. And also because if they could do this forever, then why wouldn't they just do that from the very start? I know it's kind of a meme that the Knight is like, just shut the fuck up, I'm aura farming. But like, I feel like if it's like, oh, he could just fly in the air and just shoot everyone from a distance. No, I highly doubt that. Or at the very least, I doubt that Ryth, in all his years, could not figure out at least some way to potentially stop this ability. But, back to Ryth. Ryth is a master of the Aegis forms, and the Aegis forms do deal with range attacks. As we discussed earlier, Cyrus deals with multiple opponents that can shoot out ranged magic attacks similar to the Knights. So, it's safe to assume that Cyrus, a master of the Aegis forms, can deal with it. Ryth should also be able to at least partially mitigate it. There is one more thing I'd like to discuss pertaining to the Knight, and that is their near defeat. I find it very unlikely that after a while, the Knight purposely let down their guard and purposely almost lost. I see no tactical reasoning why they would really want to do that. So I think it's pretty safe to say that the Knight genuinely got hurt by the Fun Gang and was genuinely wounded. And honestly, this is a bad sign. Like I said, the Fun Gang are high schoolers with no formal combat training. While they are amplified by the Dark World, I mean, Susie is like, what, 18? 20? At most? She's not a warrior? And she doesn't even know where she got an axe the first time she uses it. So I think it's pretty safe to say that Susie, and the rest of the fun gang for that matter, with maybe the exception of Rouse, are completely untrained. And, as we were kind of talking about earlier, assuming that the knight did not purposely let their guard down and purposely get hit, that means the knight was wounded and potentially even seriously injured by a bunch of untrained high schoolers. This, of course, does not bode well for a battle with a person that has centuries of experience. Because if the knight can nearly lose, or get close to losing, or hell, even just be seriously wounded by these said untrained high schoolers, how the hell are they gonna contest with a full-blooded, deathless blade master? Additionally, there's one other thing that I want to discuss now that I didn't really mention earlier, and that's the black knife itself. Now, this is kind of the most stretchiest of my claims in this video, and this is something a power scaler would say. But the black knife chips. And it's like, oh wow, yeah, no shit, the floor is also made of floor. But I find that interesting. It's described as a glass-like shard, and I do think that's intentional. I think it's meant to say that this blade isn't very strong. Ryth's blade is the exact opposite. It is one of the strongest blades, one of the strongest weapons in the series. In the game, you can only duel Ryth with a solar trans weapons. I believe that is because in the lore, you cannot use a normal weapon against something like this. The blade would just go right through. I honestly think that there is a decent chance that the moment the knight tries to take a swing, Ryth just holds his blade up and it just chops through. Of course, that's very lame. So we can assume that that won't happen, and that the black knife will just magically is just really strong. And it just kind of looks like glass. It's not actually made of like a glass-like material. But even then, Ryth has experience countering fellows with magic. I think there is simply no debate that he is better than the knight in blade combat. And while Ryth is not as fast, he is certainly athletic and could certainly keep up with the knight. And to get back to the knight, let's discuss how we actually do damage to the knight. For most of the fight, we do basically nothing. And then they get tired, and then there's a small moment where we can attack them. Does that sound familiar? That's just Infinity Blade, where they're not really able to be damaged for a while, and then they get vulnerable. That is just Infinity Blade. Ryth is just playing Infinity Blade in this scenario. And I honestly think that of all like these fictional duels, this is actually as close as like opponent to the Aegis forms as he is gonna get. What I'm saying is that this should be Ryth's element. He should be great at defeating opponents by tiring them out and then looking for an opening. Now, again, you can just excuse that as a gameplay feature, but I still think that Ryth has many advantages over the knight in terms of just raw experience and weapon choice. Even if we give Ryth a normal sword, I still feel that if the Fun Gang could even come close to beating the knight, Ryth could absolutely wallop them. So, I'm gonna have to give this victory to Ryth, Deathless Blade Master. I know there might be some disagreements in the comments, especially from people that don't play Infinity Blade, and I'm willing to hear it. I'm a big fan of both games, and this is definitely the first time I've ever done a video ever like this. I mean, you can look at my older videos. This is really the first time I've ever put that much effort into a video. So please feel free to comment. I will debate why I feel Ryth should win all day. Now, I think it's very possible that this video becomes outdated later. because with Chapter 5 released in 2026 and another Knight appearance inevitable, it's safe to say that we're gonna get to see more of the Knight in action. Maybe when that happens, we'll have to come back and we'll have to do a bit of a rematch with New Knight versus Ryth. But for now, I'm gonna have to give this an easy victory to Ryth. I feel the Knight, whoever they are, can't beat our boy. Thank you all for watching, and feel free to subscribe. Goodbye.